once I'd established the main lead melody and the bass sound for the drop, I then worked backwards and started to work on the intro. With the intro, I really wanted to set the scene, so I basically started off with a simplified version of the main lead sound, which basically revolves around the tonic. Going into a little bit more detail with the intro synth, like I say, a simplified version of the main synth melody. Here you can see it broken down. I wanted to create like quite a syncopated rhythm with it. And again, there's a lot of automation there to create movement in the sound. Here you can see the automation controlling the decay of the envelope of the sound. As it progresses, the envelope opens and gets wider. Again, with the sustain, as the sound progresses, the sustain steps up in increments. But the thing which is affecting the sound the most is the release of the sound, which, as you can see here, is opening and closing quite often. So that just gives the sound a bit more movement, a bit more character, a bit more interest to the ear. I generally tend to find when I'm using sounds like this, I don't want them to sound too static, as they're quite simple. So there you have the introduction of the lead melody sound. The lead is actually complemented by a drum loop, which I actually made in a different project, but I thought it would be really suitable for this track. It's essentially made up from it's this loop here. It's essentially made up from kick and snare hits, which have been shortened, and obviously a lot of the low end has been EQ'd out of them, and then I found some nice kind of ring modulated techno percussion sounds which I layered on top to kind of give it an interesting bounce. To emphasise and help build atmosphere in the intro, I added some effects samples. So here you've got a pretty standard boom with white noise, and you can pretty much hear that in every single Metrik production. Also, there is a vocal sample which comes in just before the drop, which kind of adds to the sort of suspense of the drop. Again, this is a sample which I discovered and then pitched it down and added some delay and reverb. So I basically took that vocal and ran it through a plugin called BitSpeak for the intro. So that's actually that's a really cool plugin because it basically it down samples the audio, almost giving it like a vocoded, like speak and spell kind of vibe. Here we've got the vocal, a pre-drop vocal. As you can see, I've automated some EQ, so the bottom end actually disappears when the drop kicks in, because you want to be freeing up that region for all of your other low frequency elements to come through. So I wanted to create a riser for this track, which sounds similar to the riser I heard in a track by Christian Smith and John Selway called Transit Time, in particular the Dubfire remix, and it's got a very sort of intense, pitch enveloped, kind of spacey sound to it, which actually continues to rise as the drop progresses. And I actually created my own version of this in Massive. I basically started off with a square wave and a sawtooth layered together, and a very simple pitch envelope modulating both of them, so they're both essentially rising. But the key to actually getting the spacey sound from this riser was actually by setting up the two oscillators so they're in formant mode, and then setting one so one is modulated by 24 semitones, the other one by 64, so they're both doing slightly different things. There's also a big delay added to that, which kind of adds to the intensity as it leads into the drop. So when you hear that together, it sounds a bit like this. There's also another riser layered underneath that, appropriately named jet plane riser. Again, this one was created in massive, and it's a very high-pitched sound which complements the other riser. This was created in a very similar way. It was created using a saw wave on formant mode, and then an LFO was assigned to the pitch envelope to make it rise over 12 semitones. The other key element in this track is the pad sounds. I created these pads in Omnisphere, which I find is a very rich bank of sounds. You can normally find you know, anything you might possibly want for a project in there. And I begin by introducing that pad in the intro. So that serves to very much set the scene in the intro. As it progresses into the build-up and into the drop, I automated the pitch bend so it's rising. So this in a way acts as a riser as well. And you can hear at the end there the sound quite significantly decreases in volume, as well as a lot of the bottom end, the low end frequencies are EQ'd out. I've achieved this using EQ automation here. So the purpose of that is to actually make space for the vocal to cut through before the drop, because with the huge pad and the vocal, the mix would sound too cluttered and the vocal would have less impact. So as the track progresses, I introduce certain interesting effect sounds to kind of decorate the sonic space. For example, here I found this quite unusual kind of bubble sound, which I think is it's actually from a synth, but I EQ'd it so you can only really hear the kind of the pitch envelope on it, which creates the bubble effect. They sound quite random on their own, but I think in the context of the tune they add a bit more ear candy. And then in other parts, there are certain sections where where there'll be a drum edit, and the drums might sound a little bit sparse by themselves. So to solve that, I've layered again some unusual sounds on top of them. I've actually layered some sounds on top of the kick drums, just to make them sound a bit less sparse, really.